I still remember the exact moment my world shattered. He was sitting across from me at our favorite coffee shop, his eyes avoiding mine, his hands fidgeting with the cup like a guilty child. "I need to tell you something," he whispered. My heart skipped, thinking it was something serious, but not like this. I, I'm in love with someone else." For a second, the words didn't sink in. I stared at him, trying to process. 50 years old, and I felt like a teenager slapped awake by reality. My stomach twisted, my chest burned, and for the first time in decades, I felt utterly powerless. He was by my side, but his heart belonged to another woman. We had built a life together, or so I thought. 2 children, a house filled with laughter and arguments that felt normal. But beneath the surface, I had been blind. He had been leaving traces, small, almost invisible signs, but I had convinced myself they were meaningless. Now those fragments of truth came crashing back like shards of glass. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, his voice shaking. "It just happened." I laughed, though it was hollow, bitter. "Happened? You call destroying 30 years of marriage happened?" For hours we sat there, words faltering, emotions raw. The cafe faded around us, only the weight of betrayal remained. I realized then that my life, the one I had meticulously planned, had changed in an instant. My reflection in the coffee cup's dark surface looked like a stranger, a woman I didn't recognize. That night, I went home alone. I walked through our house, rooms filled with memories, each one now tinged with pain. I opened the photo albums, tracing the smiles frozen in time, wondering how everything could seem so perfect and be so wrong at the same time. I cried, not just for the man I loved, but for the life I thought I had, for the illusions I had clung to. But as tears blurred my vision, a flicker of resolve began to grow. I was 50, yes, and I was broken, but I would not let this define me. I would rise, not because of him, but because of me. I would learn to live again, to love myself fiercely, and to rebuild a life that no betrayal could destroy. Because this is what life had taught me. Sometimes the strongest person isn't the one who never cries, but the one who decides to stand again even when the world falls apart around them. The next morning, I woke up to silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it presses against your chest and makes every heartbeat louder. I poured myself a cup of coffee, staring out the window at a world that seemed completely unchanged, yet entirely foreign. How could everything stay the same when my life had shifted so dramatically overnight? I started going through old letters and notes I had kept over the years. There was a card from our 20th anniversary with his messy handwriting spelling out promises that now felt hollow. I found postcards from trips we took, tickets from concerts we enjoyed, and little notes from our children tucked into drawers. Each one was a piece of the past, a reminder that happiness had been real, but so had deception. I called my sister, Marie, my voice trembling as I told her everything. "I can't believe this is happening," I whispered. She listened quietly, then said something I will never forget. "You've always been strong, and this will only make you stronger. You have to live for you now." Her words sparked something inside me. I realized I had spent so many years living for others, my husband, my children, even the idea of a perfect marriage. Now it was time to live for myself. I began walking in the mornings, letting the cold air wake me up and the rising sun remind me that life was still moving forward. I started journaling, writing down thoughts I had buried for years, fears, dreams, regrets. With every word, I felt a small piece of the heavy weight lift from my chest. One evening, I found myself looking through old photographs. There was one of me at 30, standing on a beach, hair windswept, smiling like the world was mine. I didn't recognize her at first, so full of hope and fire. And yet, in that smile, I saw a promise. That woman was still inside me. I realized then that rebuilding my life wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the pain hit like a tidal wave, when memories of betrayal threatened to pull me under. But I also knew something crucial. Strength isn't found in ignoring pain. It's found in facing it, acknowledging it, and choosing to move forward anyway. That night, I made a silent vow. I would reclaim my life, piece by piece, memory by memory, and joy. I wouldn't let someone else's choices define my worth. And so, the first steps of my journey began, not with anger or revenge, but with the quiet determination to rediscover myself. Weeks passed, but the ache in my chest didn't fade. It lingered like a shadow, reminding me with every heartbeat that my life had been altered forever. I realized that healing wouldn't come from avoiding the pain, it would come from confronting it head on. I enrolled in a small art class at the community center. Painting had always been a hobby I neglected, lost in the chaos of family obligations and everyday life. I picked up a brush and let color flow onto the canvas. At first, the strokes were hesitant, almost angry, as if I was painting the betrayal itself. But gradually, the images became something else. Hopeful landscapes, bright skies, flowers in bloom. Each painting felt like a small reclaiming of my soul. I also reconnected with friends I had neglected over the years. Laughter returned slowly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I realized how much I had been isolated, wrapped up in the life I thought I had to maintain. Sharing stories, hearing about their struggles, their triumphs, reminded me that life was bigger than one man's betrayal. One evening, I received a text from my husband. It was short, apologetic, and filled with regret. "I hope you find peace," it read. And for the first time, I didn't respond with anger. I simply felt the weight lift a little. His choices were his own. My happiness didn't have to depend on them. I started volunteering at a local shelter, helping women who had faced difficult times. Listening to their stories, offering support, I discovered a new sense of purpose. Strength, I realized, wasn't just about surviving your own pain, it was about helping others rise despite theirs. By the end of the month, I felt a shift within me. I was no longer the woman paralyzed by betrayal. I was learning to breathe again, to take steps forward, even if they were small. Every morning, I woke up and told myself, "You are not defined by what was taken from you. You are defined by what you choose to create." And that choice, to live fully, authentically, bravely, was mine and mine alone. The days grew longer, and so did my sense of self. I discovered the quiet power of routine, waking up early, walking through the park, painting for hours, and writing my thoughts in a journal. It was in those small rituals that I began to understand. I didn't need anyone else to define my happiness. One afternoon, I decided to take a solo trip to the mountains. The crisp air, the towering pines, and the endless sky reminded me how vast the world was and how small my worries could feel in comparison. I hiked trails I had once thought too challenging, pushing myself physically and realizing that strength was not only emotional but also physical. I met strangers along the way, some of whom shared their own stories of loss and resilience. I listened and, in return, shared pieces of my journey. Each connection reminded me that human experience is a tapestry woven with struggle, courage, and hope. Back home, I took up new challenges. I started attending workshops on personal finance and investing. For the first time, I felt truly empowered to manage my life independently, my decisions, my money, my future. I realized that independence wasn't about being alone. It was about being capable, confident, and in control of one's destiny. Some nights were harder than others. Memories of betrayal would sneak back, cold and sharp. But I learned to face them with a calm mind. I would breathe deeply, journal my feelings, and remind myself that healing is a journey, not a race. I also reconnected with my children in a new way. I realized they needed to see me strong, resilient, and joyful, not broken and defeated. Our conversations shifted from tension and sorrow to laughter, shared dreams, and mutual respect. By the end of this chapter of my life, I understood something profound. The woman I had been, naive, trusting, and dependent, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and fiercely alive. And for the first time in decades, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that no one could ever take that away. By now, I had learned a truth I never thought I would. Happiness isn't something that can be given or taken. It is created, nurtured, and fiercely protected. I started saying yes to opportunities I would have once ignored. Art shows, volunteer events, even a dance class at the community center. I embraced them all with a heart ready to feel alive again. One afternoon, I received an invitation to a reunion with old college friends. At first, I hesitated, afraid of awkward conversations or judgments about my life. But then I thought, why let fear dictate my choices? I went, and it was transformative. Laughter filled the room as we shared memories and updates. I realized how much I had missed connecting with people who truly knew me. I also reconnected with my creativity in ways I hadn't imagined. My paintings, once private, were displayed at a small local gallery. Seeing strangers admire my work sparked a new confidence. I began to understand that self-expression is not just cathartic, it is powerful. Even my family noticed the change. My children began to see me not just as their mother, but as a woman full of life, courage, and passion. Dinner conversations were lighter, filled with laughter and curiosity. I felt our bond deepen, built on respect and admiration rather than necessity or routine. Most importantly, I forgave. Not him, not the betrayal, but myself. I forgave myself for trusting, for loving fully, and for allowing my world to revolve around someone who could not cherish it. Forgiveness freed me, and in that freedom, joy bloomed. I started small rituals of celebration, morning walks to watch the sunrise, writing letters to myself about gratitude, and even treating myself to little pleasures, coffee from a new cafe, a book I'd been wanting to read, a spontaneous weekend trip. Each moment, no matter how tiny, was a declaration. I deserve joy. And as I stood before a canvas one evening, brush in hand, I realized something profound. Life's challenges do not define us. How we respond to them does. My story was no longer one of betrayal or heartbreak. It was a story of resilience, of rediscovery, and of the unyielding power of the human spirit. Months had passed since the betrayal, yet each day I woke up feeling a little stronger, a little more myself. The pain no longer defined me. It was merely a shadow that reminded me of how far I had come. I took on challenges I would have once shied away from. Public speaking, mentoring young women at the shelter, even joining a local hiking group. I embraced life fully, without fear of judgment or failure. Each step was an affirmation. I am capable. I am resilient. I am worthy. One evening, I received a call from an old colleague who had always admired my work. She invited me to speak at a women's leadership event. My first instinct was doubt. Could I really inspire others when my own life had been in turmoil? But then I remembered everything I had endured, every tear and every small victory. I realized that my story could light a path for someone else. Standing on that stage, looking at faces eager to learn, I felt a deep sense of purpose. I shared my journey, the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the process of reclaiming my life. The room was silent, then filled with applause and nods of understanding. It hit me. Pain shared can become power, and vulnerability can be a gift. At home, I continued building my sanctuary. My art studio grew brighter, the walls decorated with paintings that told my story. My morning walks became rituals of reflection, and evenings were reserved for journaling and gratitude. I was no longer surviving, I was thriving. Even when memories of the past crept in, I faced them with strength. I would acknowledge the hurt, then release it. I learned that healing is not linear, and that strength is measured by persistence, not perfection. By the end of this chapter, I realized something powerful. I had transformed pain into purpose, betrayal into wisdom, and heartbreak into resilience. I was no longer defined by what was done to me, I was defined by how I chose to rise. Life began to feel expansive, full of possibilities I had long forgotten existed. I had learned that the past does not imprison you unless you allow it to. Each morning, I woke with intention, ready to explore the world and myself. I enrolled in a writing workshop, something I had dreamed about for years but never pursued. My first attempts were shaky, filled with self-doubt and hesitation. But slowly, I found my voice, crafting stories that reflected not only my experiences, but the strength I had cultivated. Each word was a testament to survival, resilience, and hope. Opportunities began appearing in unexpected places. A local magazine published one of my essays on rediscovering oneself after betrayal. The letters I received from readers, women who had faced similar struggles, were overwhelming. I realized my journey was no longer just personal. It had the power to inspire others. I also deepened my connection with nature. Weekend hikes, quiet lakeside mornings, and watching the seasons change became rituals of renewal. I noticed that the simplest experiences, a sunrise, a bird's song, a breeze on my face, brought more joy than I had ever imagined. Socially, my life blossomed as well. I nurtured friendships with people who valued authenticity and kindness. Conversations were no longer superficial. They were meaningful, filled with shared laughter, honesty, and encouragement. I realized that choosing the right company is as important as choosing your own path. One evening, while painting in my studio, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't experienced in decades. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally arrived at a place where my happiness came from within. I was creating, connecting, and living fully on my own terms. I understood at last that life's greatest gifts are often hidden behind challenges. Betrayal had shown me the depth of my own strength. Heartbreak had opened the door to creativity, independence, and purpose. And for the first time, I looked at the future with excitement. By this point, I had grown comfortable in my own skin. The fear and doubt that once consumed me had been replaced by confidence and clarity. I realized that the life I wanted was mine to shape, and no one else could dictate my worth. I began mentoring young women professionally, helping them navigate challenges I had once faced. Guiding them, sharing my experiences, and celebrating their successes brought an unparalleled sense of fulfillment. I realized that my pain had a purpose. It was now a tool to empower others. Meanwhile, my writing career took a meaningful turn. A publisher reached out, interested in a memoir about resilience and transformation. At first, I hesitated. Sharing my personal life with the world felt vulnerable. But I reminded myself that vulnerability is courage in disguise. I said yes, committing to telling my story honestly, without embellishment or shame. At home, my life reflected the changes within me. I redecorated my space to feel like a sanctuary, soft colors, open spaces, art that spoke to my soul. Every corner reminded me that I was creating a life I loved, piece by piece. Socially, I found myself surrounded by people who supported and inspired me. Friendships became deeper, bonds stronger. I no longer felt the need to prove myself or seek approval. Instead, I shared joy, wisdom, and laughter freely. One evening, reflecting on my journey, I realized that life had taught me the most important lesson. True strength is not measured by what you endure, but by what you build afterward. I was no longer the woman defined by betrayal and loss. I was a woman creating a legacy of courage, creativity, and empowerment, not just for myself, but for anyone who needed inspiration. And in that moment, I understood something profound. The story of my life was no longer about survival. It was about thriving and leaving a mark that mattered. As I approached the milestone of 51, I began to notice a shift within me, a calm, steady confidence that had been absent for decades. The storm of betrayal, the weeks of doubt, and the months of rebuilding had finally settled into something solid: peace. I started each day with meditation, a simple practice of breathing and gratitude. I reflected on my journey, not just the pain, but the triumphs, the lessons, and the moments of joy that had emerged despite everything. I realized that true peace comes not from avoiding hardship, but from embracing it and learning from it. Professionally, my memoir was nearly finished. Sharing my story, the raw truth of betrayal, and the deliberate steps to reclaim my life had been cathartic. I knew that my words could help others find strength, even in their darkest moments. At home, I had cultivated a sanctuary of calm. My art filled the walls, my journals lined the shelves, and my plants thrived in the sunlight. Each morning, I would sit with a cup of coffee and simply observe life. The laughter of my children, the chirping of birds outside, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. These small, simple moments reminded me that happiness is built in the quiet spaces, not in grand gestures. Socially, I had found relationships that nourished my spirit. Friends who celebrated my successes, supported me in challenges, and accepted me for who I truly was. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect my time and energy, and to say no when necessary. Freedom, I realized, is as much about what you let go of as what you embrace. One evening, reflecting on the journey from pain to power, I smiled. I was no longer the woman who trembled at betrayal, nor the one who doubted her worth. I was someone who had faced the storm, navigated the wreckage, and emerged whole. And in that quiet moment, I understood the final truth. Strength and peace are not found in what life gives or takes. They are cultivated within, nurtured through resilience, courage, and self-love. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting golden light across my studio. I took a deep breath, feeling the fullness of life in that moment. Everything I had endured, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the months of doubt, had led me here. I reflected on my journey from the woman who once felt powerless to the one who now stood fully in her strength. I had discovered that life's most profound lessons are often hidden within the pain we try to escape. Over the years, I had built a life that was authentically mine. My children had witnessed my resilience. My friends had shared in my triumphs. My art and writing had become extensions of my spirit, connecting me to the world in ways I had never imagined. I thought of the man who had once broken my heart. There was no anger left, only acceptance. His choices had been his own, and they did not define me. I had reclaimed my story, my joy, and my sense of purpose. That afternoon, I sat by the lake, watching the ripples of sunlight across the water. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that taught me strength, for the solitude that taught me self-love, and for the journey that revealed my capacity to rise. I knew life would continue to bring challenges, as it always does, but I was ready. I had learned to face adversity with courage, to embrace change with openness, and to love myself unconditionally. As I walked home, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, I whispered to myself, "You are whole. You are enough. You are free." And in that simple, profound truth, I found peace. I had survived, I had healed, and I had created a life that reflected the strength and beauty within me.